Hello everyone, Erin the Impatient Gardener here, coming to you from a beautiful but chilly spring evening in my Zone 5B, 6A garden. And today's video is a bit different because I have partnered with Stephen and Matthew from the Horticulturalists in Australia. And we're going to talk about how climate affects the way we garden. So when we talked about how we were going to make a pair of videos, so there's one on my channel and one on their channel, we kind of struggled a little bit because it's hard to find sort of a middle ground between southeastern Wisconsin and Australia. I mean, if you look at different gardening climates that can grow at least some of the same plants, you'd probably be hard-pressed to find two places that were more different. So that led us to the topic here, which is how climate affects the way we garden, not just necessarily what we can grow, although obviously that's covered, but the way in which we garden. So I'm going to be popping in here to offer some of my thoughts on what Stephen and Matthew say about what their gardening year looks like and how they garden. And then same thing's going to be happening over on their channel as well. So do make sure once you're done watching this video to head over there. The one thing I will say is that we started working on this in February. So I think their part was filmed in February in 100 degrees at the Melbourne Botanical Garden. And I think I filmed my part in early March, so I'm bundled up and nothing is growing yet. So when you go over there, you'll see like what is going on here. And it just took us a while to pull this whole video together. And because gardening climates are very specific, and we all know that, I'm really anxious to hear your comments about your thoughts on what their gardening year looks like, because there are plenty of places where, to me, this sounds a lot like gardening in zone 8, 9, or 10 here in the United States. I feel like we kind of ended up in two big extremes because I'm up here in a relatively northern cold zone. So take it away, Stephen and Matthew. I will be checking back in throughout this video.
Hello, Erin. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Stephen.
And we are the Horticulturalists. Thank you very much for having us in this collaboration.
And we're in less than cold and chilly Melbourne at the Royal Botanic Gardens today. And I think it's about 38 degrees Celsius today.
100 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's a great day to be talking about how your climate defines your gardening year, because let me tell you, it is hot.
It certainly is.
We're hiding under the shade. We had grand plans of beautiful vistas for you, but it is just so hot in Melbourne right now.
Yes.
But we're not. But it's a great entry point for us to talk about how climate affects how we garden all around the world.
Yes, exactly. And we are quite different, I have to say, to most parts of North America, because our climate is, I guess you'd say, slightly damp Mediterranean, maybe?
Or warm temperate. And I think the thing to remember is in Australia, we don't have the same gardening zonal systems as you do in the States. So for us, the country is divided up really. It's about rainfall,
yes,
and heat more than anything, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's more about heat, because cold, except in a very, very few areas of Australia, is not really an issue that we have to contend with. We have some areas where we get reasonably heavy frosts. We get very little, if any, snow in most parts of Australia. And so we talk more about hardiness with regards to, in fact, heat and dry tolerant plants more so than cold and frost tolerant plants.
So we're in the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, which is right in the heart of the city. Obviously, cities have their own sort of different microclimates as you spread out. So in the inner city, Melbourne very rarely gets to 0 degrees centigrade or 32 Fahrenheit. Almost never has frost. So it's kind of a balmy, perfect horticultural environment. But where you are,
yes, where I am at Mount Macedon, it's slightly higher in altitude, it's more inland, so we do in fact get frosts that can kill certain plants. We do get occasionally a smattering of snow, which would probably make people laugh as a rule, so it's not really there in any way, shape or form as a rule. But we do get, because we're surrounded by plains, we can get very hot, dry summers and hot burning winds, and they're the things that we have to watch when we're gardening.
yes.
So when we talk about vastly different gardening experiences, we're not just talking about Northern Hemisphere and Southern Hemisphere and whether we see the North Star in the sky or the Southern Cross in the sky. We're actually talking about, when it comes to hardiness, completely different concepts of what we think that is. Hardiness here, of course, is about how cold can it get in winter and how much snow protection do we need. Whereas when we're talking about hardiness there, we're talking about how hot can it get in summer and how dry can it get in summer. So like those two things are polar opposites.
Well, it is summer, and summer for most Australian gardeners, believe it or not, is sort of our downtime. I mean, we've got things we've got to do. We've got to water and protect our plants from heat and dry, but really it's not the most pleasant time for us to be spending in our gardens. So we tend to actually try and garden for the autumn through winter and into the spring, because they're the months that we can enjoy our garden most. The summer can be hot, dry, mosquito-ridden, fly-ridden. There's all sorts of reasons why we don't enjoy our gardens in the summer so much, but in the winter we can be out and about.
And I guess too, the point, particularly in Melbourne here and in our climate, is that the gardening year is 12 months, it's 24/7.
It is.
So the downtime is ironically at the peak of sort of sunlight and heat,
Yeah.
but it's just too unpleasant, really.
It is. You don't want to be out in the garden getting melanomas, for goodness sake. So,
Which I've had, which is why I always wear a hat.
yeah, and I
You
haven't
don't.
yet, but you know, there's time. So it's sort of the reverse, because I know Erin is at home reading seed catalogues and bulb catalogues through the winter, because you can't even go out and turn the ground. Whereas here we can be doing all sorts of things through the winter months, but it's just too hot and too horrible to do anything else but to stand around with a hose, watering a plant, then watering yourself, then watering a plant.
There you go. So our downtime here is summer.
Yes.
So interestingly, I feel like we have very shared experiences, although again, completely opposite. Because summer is the downtime there when it's not pleasant to be outside, or impossible to be outside. And so the downtime in their gardens in Australia is summer. And of course, the downtimes in our gardens here in my area is winter, because the ground is physically frozen. You can't really garden unless you count things like dreaming and planning and maybe a little bit of pruning or something like that, unless you count that as part of gardening. So, it's interesting when we start thinking about the grass is greener on the other side. It sounds wonderful to actually be gardening 12 months out of the year. But then you think about the other side of that, and we do the same amount of gardening that they're doing in their Australian gardens down there, except we're packing it into probably 8 months in a year, maybe even 7. So I feel like the gardening year here is much more involved. Like I feel like we are going really, really hard when we're going, and then when we stop, we're stopped because we are inside watching gardening TV shows or YouTube channels or reading magazines or books and getting inspiration. But it's this next topic that Matthew and Stephen talk about where I get real envious.
Well, Stephen, I guess one of the things too that determines our gardening year, which is essentially 24/7, 12 months, is in our climate, the incredible range of species from different regions of the world that we're able to grow.
Exactly. If we can find the right microclimate in our gardens here around the Melbourne district, we can certainly grow things from proper tropical countries and areas. So we can bring things down from far north Queensland or from Papua New Guinea, all over the place, and grow them in our gardens in Melbourne. Right through the temperate things, so we can grow maples, we can grow all sorts of Northern American and European deciduous trees. I guess the limit comes when we get to that sort of more alpine and Arctic type climates, where you've got those beautiful little matting plants and the gentians, the edelweiss, all those sorts of plants from the high mountains. Those are a real struggle for us. The only way we'd ever grow them down here is to probably put in a refrigerated bed. So there you go.
Which I know you'd love to,
Yep.
loving an alpine. And what that means is that we can essentially have something in bloom all year, because we
easily.
can grow summer dormant South African bulbs, winter dormant South African bulbs, aloes that bloom in midwinter, and all manner of plants and shrubs that do a lot of things in winter.
Yeah, well, a lot of our Australian natives, in fact, do that. Many of our natives are sort of winter, spring oriented, which is fantastic because it is a time where we can be out enjoying our gardens and some bright colour when the weather is, for at least us, coldish. It's just wonderful that we can have that bright colour. And in the winter, that's when we need it, because in the summer months, I have to say we don't go out so much, and so the colour's not quite so important.
And talking of colour, the fact that our light is so bright means that actually bright colours do really well. And we'll show you the cannas and the belladonnas and the things that are in bloom now to show bright colours work really well in this light.
Yeah,
Pastels
pastels,
tend not to.
no.
And so winter, just in terms of the light, is also a great time to see and admire flowers.
That's
here.
when our pale pinks and whites come into their own.
There you go.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I'm jealous. It's not fair. They get to grow that huge range of plants. Many of the plants that are in my garden, I'm sure they can grow there. And then I can probably grow some of the plants from there, but it requires jumping through hoops. I mean, this gets down to what I have to do with tropical plants to overwinter them, or just decide that they're not going to grow all year, or try to speed up their growth because they're only going to be around as an annual. But interestingly, we actually have difficulty growing the same groups of plants, which are these alpine plants. So we can grow some, like just off the top of my head, Hydrangea serrata, the mountain hydrangea, does very well here. And that grows in sort of high altitude mountains of Asia, basically. And that grows great here. It survives our winters. It gives us blue or pink flowers, depending on our soil pH. It's a favorite of mine for sure. But then I start thinking about these cute little alpine things, the kind of things that you kind of need like a crevice garden to plant in. Those do not do well out in the garden proper here. You can make little microclimates for those for sure, but overwintering them can be hard because many of those plants just want such sharp drainage, or they want a specific soil pH, and I wouldn't say that in my area we can necessarily offer that. That said, I'd love to grow a tree fern, but you don't see that happening here in my Wisconsin garden, do you? So, I mean, if we're making check marks here, they're winning on that one.
And of course, Matthew, that means that we're never off the hook. So there's always something we have to be doing because we're working with such an enormous palette of plant material from all over the world. So there'll be something needing pruning, something needing feeding, something needing watering. I mean, all those different things will need to be done on a regular basis throughout the year.
So I guess that's one of the key differences that, and we'll get to this in context of other things, that we kind of don't have that rigid timetable of tasks necessarily that you do in the Northern Hemisphere, because we can mulch almost at any point of the year. And in fact, you often need to mulch in summer.
Yeah.
I mean, you would do it in spring perhaps, or in autumn, but you know, we don't have to follow that same regime.
No, and in fact, we sort of can't in a way. I mean, I would hesitate to mulch in midsummer if the ground is already dry, because then it gets quite hard to get the moisture down there. But certainly if you've got moisture in the ground, we could be mulching in the summer. You might in fact pull your mulches back in the winter a little bit to let a bit more air and whatever winter warmth we've got in, whereas in other colder areas you put the mulch down and it protects the roots from the cold. For us it's more about moisture conservation, weed suppressants, and keeping the roots cool.
And pruning too. I mean, it's autumn, it's pruning time, because again, like Australian shrubs respond differently to many other things that are going on. And I mean, a lot of roses here basically flower all year, so you have to pick your moment to prune those even.
Well, you do, although it's still recommended to do most of your rose pruning during the winter, but then you still have to do a follow-up prune if you're going to get autumnal flowers on the ones that do in fact have multiple flowering periods. So you do your late winter prune, you'll get your roses in flower by high spring, you then do a summer prune, then you'll get your autumnal batch of roses coming on and doing their thing. So lots of plants will need multiple pruning. I'd say the same of wisterias and lots of other plants like that. You do your winter pruning, but then there's often summer pruning required as well.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew, I guess the other main thing that we need to discuss that probably sets us apart from some of the northern climes is timetabling your garden.
Yes.
I know when I've spent time in England, you know, they can plant their tulips and expect them to flower at a certain time with, you know, X number of weeks between, and their gladioli and lots of things can be timed to flower at specific times for the big event or whatever. Here we find that a little more complicated because our climate isn't perhaps as completely diverse. but it pops all over the place. So you can't have this sense of being able to plant something and have a real understanding of it flowering at a specific time. I guess we can still probably get away with the gladioli to an extent if that is your penchant. But most other plants will flower in their own given time when they feel like it, due to the prevailing weather conditions they've had to put up with as they've been growing.
And I guess the same issue as with tasks and bugs, there isn't on off, it's not that reliable, it's not that markable in the calendar.
No, it's not. So I guess you're in for more surprises on a regular basis when you garden in a climate like we have here in Melbourne.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, well, I quite like the fact that I can't be sure what this autumn's going to do or what next spring's going to do. We often live in a nervous state of exhaustion when we hear that there's a hot weather forecast. And so, you know, like in any part of the world, I guess there are issues and things we have to manage. And I have to say, being able to grow the diversity of plants we can and enjoy our gardens pretty well all year round, I think we're very lucky.
We are.
So this whole idea that because of the climate they are growing in, they don't really have a gardening calendar that dictates when certain tasks have to be done by is mind-blowing to me. Because if you grow up as a gardener in one area, and I have done almost, well, I guess I've done all my gardening basically in this same zone, it is mind-boggling to me that there wouldn't be a timeline for such things. You know, you plant out certain crops by a certain time. You prune your roses at a certain time. You cut back your perennials at a certain time. This is mind-blowing to me because, like, my life is dictated by this gardening calendar. As an involved gardener, like, it's all about, like, when do things have to get done by? And so it's crazy to me to think that there aren't that timeline there. Now, of course, I hate mulching. We all know that. So I would say you can mulch whenever. But the idea, too, of the purpose of mulch is like compost. You know how compost is the answer to most soil problems? Well, mulch is the answer to most other problems with plants, really. So up here, we're mulching for, obviously, and let's just start with weed suppression, which is across the board, no matter where you are, mulch helps with weed suppression. But we're mulching for winter protection in many cases. And in fact, if I do mulch, because again, terrible mulcher, not a big mulcher, just a job I don't care to do. When I mulch, I'm often mulching in fall because I'm throwing on an extra layer of protection for winter. And they're mulching for exactly the opposite reason, for an extra layer of protection for this really difficult summer that they have to endure. And I love this idea that they are pruning roses multiple times throughout the year because they basically don't stop blooming. So you can keep, as long as you prune, you can keep them going all year. What a concept. I mean, here, well, we know how roses are here. And it's interesting to think about sort of the reverse side of the fact that they don't really have a gardening timetable that they work by. So for instance, let's talk about like what a mid-season prune looks like here. So here, if I prune back a phlox or a tall sedum in early to mid-June by maybe a third or half, I know that I'm probably going to delay blooming by about 2 weeks, but that it's going to bloom shorter and it's going to be a more compact plant and I'm still going to get those flowers, just going to be 2 weeks later. And you can actually sort of plan when things grow in your garden. In fact, if I prune those phlox and I don't prune all of them, I can actually have a continuous like stair step of blooming of phlox throughout the season just because I went in and I basically cut it in half in, say, early to mid-June.
Well, there you are, Erin. I think we've kind of wrapped up what gardening in southern Australia is all about on this 100-degree day. It is so hot. We kind of couldn't have chosen a worse, better day to talk about gardening and climate.
Well, exactly. And so we've covered pretty well everything. I think we've talked about no downtime on pests, summer being our down season if there's one at all. And of course, there's always the advantage of being able to grow things from virtually anywhere in the world. So we have this huge palette of plants that we can rely on.
We do. But Erin, thank you very much. Very much looking forward to hearing what you think about our issues. And we look forward to seeing your video about gardening in your climate and how your climate and calendar affects your gardening. So thank you for having us, and I hope your viewers have enjoyed this visit to Melbourne Botanic Gardens and Melbourne.
Yes, and we'll hopefully catch up again soon.
See you next time.
Bye.
So make sure you head over to their channel, the Horticulturalists, and check out my video where I'm talking a lot more about some of the challenges and what it's like to garden in this climate. See if you agree. Leave a comment both places for sure. I'm just going to add one thing that did not come up in the video is that one thing we don't have here are like terrible man-eating snakes or poisonous spiders. Two things that no matter how bad our winter is makes me very happy that I garden here because no thank you on both of those. All right, have a great day in your garden. Please leave a comment below. Let's talk, let's keep that conversation going because I want to hear what it's like in your climate. You know, if you feel like you're maybe more like what Stephen and Matthew are dealing with, or you're more kind of like me or somewhere in the middle. I don't know, I like the conversation. I think it's really illuminating and interesting and always good to connect on these things and talk about them. As always, have a great day in your garden and we will see you soon. Thank you for watching.